Hello, this is Brett Barnhart with Barnhart Engineering. I'm going to be feeding some boxes here, and these boxes are pretty thick. Let me show you here. You can see how they want to lay. So these are pretty thick boxes. So at the folds on one end, they're thin on the other. Customer wants to inkjet. So I'm not going to actually be inkjetting, but this is the inkjet head. It's adjustable left, right, up and down, back and forth. This is a right angle vacuum table. Can also turn and run the feeder straight onto it. That way it straightens and orients the piece along the back rail as it's inkjetting. That way everything's always straight. If you just inkjet straight off this onto another conveyor that's not a vacuum conveyor, you've got other difficulties. I'm not saying you can't straighten it out. There are ways to do that as well, but this is the best way to do it. You'll notice I got a piece of paper here. That's the best way to get the piece up and over the belt. I've tried it many other ways, and you just can't beat a piece of paper. It slides right over top of it. I've tried clear sheets of plastic to make it fancy and what have you, and that slides easy. So usually I have a customer use some electrical tape because you can tape on the table and it leaves no residue. So let's get started here. This is running at 9,300 an hour. Now, when people call me up and want to know how fast something will run, the number one thing they never consider is how long it takes to load it and how long it takes to unload it. And normally they'll tell me that they've got that handled, or they'll figure that out. And I know usually right up front, there's no way they're going to get anywhere close to those speeds unless they have a stacker at the end. It depends how many people you want to run. I mean, obviously you want to run as less labor as possible. So having a stacker or a conveyor, a shingling conveyor or something. In this case, it's going to take all I can do to keep up with this feeder in loading these. There are roughly, I think there were right around 200 boxes, maybe a little bit less. I ran 155 of them in 59 seconds. That's how I came up with the count of 3,900 just before I made the video. So I'm going to turn on the conveyor. You'll hear the vacuum come on. The belt has vacuum to hold it down. Couple observations. I saw this wheel moved on me here a little bit as it was going. It's bumping around quite a bit, so probably be better if I had an application here that had the wheel just reach over and I could just turn it and adjust it so the arm wasn't so long. But obviously I can anchor the arm down, and I could also support the arm here in the middle of the table here a little bit too. That would help so it didn't bounce so much. That bouncing a little bit gives you some inconsistency. Other than that, it ran pretty well. I think the first few off the conveyor, I don't think we had any misses, but I think a couple followed themselves through. But as long as the head prints fast enough, those would have inkjetted just fine. I didn't quite see what happened there at the beginning. I don't think any extras came out of here, but I think a couple stumbled right here, so when the next one came, it was right behind it. And right now I'm running this as a stream feeder, or it's just continuously running. So the separation is based on the speed between this and this. However, I can set it up so it feeds one, and then it triggers itself. So one stop, one stop, one stop, one stop. Then I can regulate how fast it goes by doing it in that mode. That's a different mode. So it would come forward and stop. So it would be feed, stop, feed, stop, feed, stop, feed, stop, feed, stop. That way you could get a more accurate, and the one is not going to follow it until this gets triggered. So if one comes forward, hangs up for a brief second, it won't trigger the next one until this eye goes off. So that's another way to do it. Lots of ways to set it up. The feeder can be done all kinds of ways. It can be set up so that it stops at 100, so you know you fed 100. You inkjet at 100, the machine stops, you have 100. Obviously, we can put a counter on this end. Lots of ways to do it. The table can be raised up. Well, right now the table is raised up by tape measures around here somewhere. Let's see where the tape. Right now the table is at 33 inches, and I believe it goes up to really close to 40 to 42 inches. The tabletop does. And then of course you can also angle it if you want to as well. And it also lowers down pretty low. So lots of ways to adjust it. And I'll be making some other videos doing other size boxes here in a little bit. But this box here ran fairly smooth, and I can't make every video where everything runs absolutely perfect. If I was going to be running on the customer end thousands of these boxes a day, you know, once you have your setup going and you've worked all that out perfectly, it'll run consistent. We just noticed that the wheel coasted a little bit, so we would want to, you know, anchor that down. In this case, probably could just tighten it up a little bit more. You know, I got almost another half a turn on that, so it wasn't turned real tight, but there's other ways to do that. If the bounce is causing problems, that can be adjusted as well. All right, thanks. Brent Barnhart, Barnhart Equipment. Hello, this is Brent Barnhart. I'm going to be feeding some boxes here, and this is a right angle inkjet table, and we want to address right here number. Now, since we're going to be feeding in this direction, we want to inkjet in this direction. So I have the head in the direction in which we want to put the number. Now, they could feed it out this way and put the number on, but they'd have to have two heads because that's a ½ inch wide by whatever distance. So the number I think I measured was around an inch, maybe a hair more. So I don't know if two heads would do it, maybe close. So they could go this way if they had two heads, but this is the right way to go. Now I could feed these this way as well, but then they wouldn't ride on this rail very well. So we're going to feed this way, and then of course we really wouldn't need this. We could just go right onto a conveyor and stack them. But my last video, we did a box that had the inkjet head here, and we could not inkjet in the direction that the feeder was feeding. And then this allowed us to orientate it, make it straight. Now, as far as the inkjet head here, it can be mounted on the feeder. I didn't do that just because it's easier. I've already got it set up this way. Straightness is not a problem. I have some customers, you know, they want to know why I don't have adjustable rails on here. You don't need adjustable rails. If it comes out of here straight, it'll be straight the whole way through. It's not going to move. It'll stay there. If it comes out crooked, it'll stay crooked. And to adjust the straightness, you just adjust the rubber feet so that if it's turned a little bit, just on the rubber feet so you straighten it out. When we get done, I think I'll see the speed, but we are well over 10,000 an hour, or right at probably 12 or 13 maybe. I'm going to turn the vacuum table on now. And let me point out one more thing. People ask how fast they can feed something. Well, it's not really a matter of how fast you can feed something. You have to be able to take these out of the box. So let's say you have a whole pallet of these. You got to be able to open the box. You got to get them out of the box. You got to get them in the feeder. And then if there's one person doing it, somebody has to come down here and take them off the line and put them back in a box. So your true how many an hour you're going to get is based on how much time that takes, whether it's one person doing it or two persons doing it. Obviously, it would be faster if there's two people doing it. In this case, I can feed these so fast that I would stay plenty busy keeping the boxes opened, loading the feeder, and that person down there would stay plenty busy boxing them up at that speed because they're so bulky. You know, they're not thin. If I'm doing it by myself, what I would like to do is, let me jump back one more thing. However your printer is boxing these is going to determine how fast you can go as well. If they're turning these in the box constantly like this, every time you open a box, you've got to be sorting through them and returning them to put them in the feeder, and that's going to take tremendous amounts of time. So you don't want them to turn them that often, and also you don't want them to use an odd box where some are this way and some are this way. If you're doing a lot of them, it's worth your time to buy a custom-sized box so that, for instance, you know, in this case, it could be a box that would take, you know, 2 rows of these like this, and then a second row. And then on the second row, you'd have to put a piece of paper in between to keep them nice. Now these lay nice and flat, so there's no need to turn them. But that would give you like 2 nice rows, and then it would eliminate, you could get quite a few in a box, of course, depending on how long the box is. But the faster, you know, you'd want to go with a longer box so you could put more in it, so that you're only opening one box every so often, and you don't have small boxes. You got to keep opening boxes. And same with the person who's putting them in a carton down on this end. And then the thicker they are, if they don't lay, you got to turn them. You only want to turn them every so often, and you probably want to turn them in the same increments. So that means if the printer, when he is die cutting and gluing them, when he goes to box them and turn them, you know, a good handful is about where he wants to turn them, so that when you reach in the box, you can grab that handful. If you cannot determine where the turn is without having to look at it some and flip around, then you're wasting time and the feeder might run out if it's going really fast. If that case, you'll want to put a divider in between there. And if you regularly order from them, you can always send the boxes back. I've had clients when I was in production that we had custom-sized boxes. We did millions every month, and we just sent the cartons back. And we used those cartons until they disintegrated. Then they either threw them out or I threw them out as we used them, and they got too beat up and we couldn't fix them. So how they carton and prepare and how you stage it on this end and stage it on that end is also going to determine speed. I've got a pallet jack here. It's a high lift, you know, that raises up so high so that as you're going, you can raise the pallet up so you're not bending down, working down to your ankles. In this case, I got the pallet jack turned around the other way because I'm not doing production work, but, you know, I want the pallet jack turned my way so that I could, you know, adjust it while I'm working. So anyhow, let me get going. These are just falling in a box at the moment. As far as when they go down a delivery end, you want the same thing. You want to batch it so that if a handful is, say, 25 of them, you want some sort of a break so that the person boxing knows that that's 25. They don't have to spend time counting. And I know my equipment here, you can adjust it to give you that break down here. Some of my feeders actually adjust the delivery so that it speeds up or slows down to give you the break. Some of my feet, you can also adjust it so that it pauses for a moment to give you the break. Or, you know, we have devices that's a kicker that will count on its own if you have just a regular conveyor, and the kicker will kick the last one a little bit crooked. That way you know that there's 25 there. And then if you're working by yourself, and let's say you can get 15 groups of 25 and then the conveyor belt is full, you don't want the conveyor belt to keep running if you don't turn it off in time, or it'll take and push all the stacks together and you won't know where the break is. So I make a conveyor that you tell it how many bundles will fit on the conveyor. So after it counts 25, if you can get 10 bundles of 25, you program this and tell it you want 25s and you want, and the delivery will hold 10 bundles. When that's happened, this stops feeding and it turns off the conveyor. So in this case, I can't walk away because this empties. But if I'm feeding a thin stock, I could fill this up and literally go take a phone call in the other room, and it would take in batch, 25. I have a pharmaceutical company. We were counting in 300s, so it would count. I could get on the conveyor, which is about this long, something like it would count 300 in a break, and I could get like 20 sets of 300. So if I literally started it and left the room, it would count 300, give you a break, 300 a break, and then everything would shut off. And when I came back in the room, 10 minutes, an hour later, everything shut off, and right on the conveyor are my bundles, and I didn't lose them. If the conveyor kept running, it would push them together, you'd lose the brake, and it also might dump on the floor as it keeps going, so you don't want that. So there's lots of ways to increase production, but it's not always a matter as to how fast you can get them to feed. You got to be able to get them loaded, feed them accurately, and get them boxed up and taken care of on that end, whether it's one person or two persons, and whether it's one person or two people depends kind of on how you want to set up your workflow. In this case, I'm just dumping them into a box, and on the vacuum conveyor, you can adjust the amount of vacuum you have on the belt. Because these are so long, the more I put on here, the more holes that are covered up on the belt, and the more holes that are covered up, you're blocking the vacuum. There's so much suction that it can slow the motor down and stop it. So my last job, I had a lot of vacuum because they were short pieces. But this job, I'm bleeding off a lot of the vacuum so that when I got a bunch on here, it doesn't slow the conveyor down. Really easy. It's just a little adjustment down there. You open or close it based on how much vacuum you need. So let's see what we can do here. Okay, now let me go over a couple things. While I was running, you'll notice that sometimes a couple came close together. That's not a problem because it inkjetted them separately, but then as it came on the conveyor, what I did was I increased the vacuum a little bit. Remember I told you I backed it off? Because when they were coming out, it was taking them just a little bit to get going because I didn't have enough vacuum. So I increased the vacuum a little bit to get them to go. But like I said, if I turn the vacuum up too much, there's too much vacuum and it'll slow this down. So, I had to make a little bit of an adjustment while we went. But if we were in production mode, I'll have to watch the video, but I don't think we would have had any bad ones, even though the consistency a few times got off. As it went under the inkjet head, that was consistent, but the consistency here got off just a few times. So while we were running, I was able to make that adjustment. Now, the wheel I have here is turned in a little bit, and all that does is as it comes out of here, it just helps this get going a little bit, even though the vacuum grabs it and gets it going. Also, the faster I run this, the more it wants to bounce. As it hits this, it might want to bounce. So as this comes forward, I adjust this wheel, so just as soon as it hits, that wheel grabs it. And it's turned a little bit to drive it over. Now, the belt is angled like this, so even if it lands on the belt like this, without the wheel, as it travels, it will straighten it up along this guide here, because the belt is running at an angle. This is straight, and the belt is close right here, and at an angle up there. And then there's two modes I can run the feeder. One, I can run it in stream mode, which means you start it, and it just keeps on running. How you get your separation is the speed. You speed this up, slow this down, and then when this comes out, how much space is between them will be the speed differential. Now that's how it's done in the mailing business most of the time. In this case, I'm using on-demand mode. So as soon as it feeds one, this eye triggers, it feeds another. And I can delay, I have a delay switch on the back to adjust. Once it says to feed one, I can delay it by several milliseconds. So if the next one follows real close, and I got too many on the belt, I can delay the eye just a little bit. So once it gets triggered, it waits a second before it feeds one. And by just turning that dial, I can adjust the spacing. So there's several ways to set this up. Both ways work well. In this case, I just decided to run it on demand mode. And the video before this one, I do believe that was in stream mode.